Welcome to the Business Travel Convention of 2021.
And for making it to this in-person event, the first one in over, for us, almost 2.5 years.
We're helping other travelers be ready to get back on the road.
I feel safe getting back to meeting live.
Travel is how the business world keeps moving. But like the in-person, face-to-face, the conversation we're having right now is really how we get work done.
It's really important to be here, to be at the forefront of knowing what's next.
It's just learning together, living together, and building back the travel industry together.
There was no question. GBTA Convention 2021 was where I was going to learn about how to bring my travelers back to the road. 18 months at home and pandemic is over, and I'm ready to get back and get our travelers back on the road.
Please welcome to the stage Jenny Sabinu, Chair of GBTA's Sustainability and Responsibility Committee, and Mark Kushiri, GBTA Board of Directors Vice President.
There we go. Let's do this.
Hello, everyone. It is truly exciting to be here with you today. Not only to be back in person at convention, but to see sustainability as a main theme of convention and a shared priority for our industry and GBTA.
It is critical for GBTA and its members to be leading, setting the agenda and the standard across our industry. Our members are all in some form targeted to put sustainability at the heart of their programs. Some of you have already started, and many are about to begin the journey.
GBTA's Sustainability and Responsibility Committee has been ramping up over the past year, and the committee is global in its scope because sustainability needs to be one conversation across our regions and membership around the world. We've kicked off an outreach effort to all GBTA committee chairs and vice chairs to collaborate in joint efforts to tackle the climate emergency. It is going to take everyone's involvement and all committee subject matter experts to move initiatives forward. 2 initiatives that the Sustainability and Responsibility Committee are looking to tackle are relaunching an enhanced and updated version of the current GBTA Sustainability Toolkit and the development of a globally recognized industry standard supplier scorecard. Our goal is to provide the tools that you, the members, are asking for, share and collaborate on best practices, and create the standardization that the industry needs. And for Convention 2022, we hope to bring you education sessions representing a cross-collaboration of several committees dedicated to sustainability. We look forward to more conversation and engagement with you in the Sustainability and Responsibility Hub, available to all GBTA members. Learning and collaborating as an industry will be critical for truly moving forward on sustainability in the business travel sector.
Absolutely, Jenny. Sustainability in our industry isn't just a role for one committee. It must be a collective effort, and one that is championed. In 2022, GBTA will be embarking on a sustainability journey to demonstrate the significant contribution that our business travel sector can make on climate action and corporate responsibility. On behalf of your GBTA Board of Directors, I will serve as the executive sponsor of GBTA's sustainability efforts moving forward. And today, I'm so pleased to announce a new way forward, the creation of the GBTA Founding Partners in Sustainability Program. Under this program, the association will develop the framework for establishing sustainability as a key pillar going forward, along with new impactful initiatives. Some areas of focus will include policy and advocacy, measures and tracking, C-level engagement and public affairs, recognition, and of course, education. And even before the ink was dry on the idea of a Founding Partners program, there was a lot of interest and action. We want to welcome and thank these organizations and supporters who have already enthusiastically stepped up and made the commitment to participate in the program. This is only a preview of what's to come. We look forward to sharing more in the coming weeks as we move into the new year. Sustainability matters to us all. Let's start the conversation here. Thank you all.
Please welcome Designated President of Shell Aviation, Jan Toshka.
Oh, many people. That's good. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Jan Toshka, and I am indeed, as of this week, the new president of Shell Aviation globally. And I'm very, very delighted to be here. Now, in case you wonder, what is Shell doing here? The booth you might have seen, the team, a few of us on stage. Let me try to give you the answer by summarizing the key message of the slides I brought, and I will talk you through over the next roughly 9 to 10 minutes. And that key message basically is, we are here to talk sustainability. We are here to demonstrate we believe in partnering, we believe in ecosystems, we believe in collaborating with our customers and the interfaces, the travel management companies in between. We are here to we believe that the challenge we all have ahead of us, being decarbonizing of travel, of aviation in particular, is a challenge we can only overcome together. And that's why we're here. Now, a quick hello from our friends in the legal department. I would be flattered if you very much like what I'm saying, but please do not buy shares, do investment decisions, or anything like this. So that's our legal department. Now, when we talk Shell, most people think about a gas station, rightly so. We have many of them all over the world, but we also have 1 million corporate B2B customers globally we're dealing with every year in roughly 150 markets. So that is a rather large footprint, a rather large business we're running globally. And if we do zoom into the aviation business, very similar, 60 markets we're operating in. Every 14 seconds we are fueling a plane, and roughly 2 million planes globally we fuel. Now, let me be a bit humble. These are 2019 figures, but we see the recovery real strong, real steep coming back. Now, with this size, which is obviously beneficial, it brings a lot of benefits, it brings us scale, it brings us the seat at the table, it gives us lobbying power, it gives us enormous leverage in various ways. But it does also give us an enormous amount of CO2, of carbon, which is why the Shell Group has made it absolutely clear by 2050 or earlier, we will be a net zero emission company. And that includes the scope 1 and 2. That means our own processes. We will be taking out the carbon from our own processes, as well as the energy we are using for that. But also it includes the carbon sitting in the products we are selling to our customers, so-called scope 3. And this is where you come in. Back to aviation. Aviation being the probably toughest sector to decarbonize. Electrification will take 20 years, maybe longer, we don't know yet. Hydrogen certainly as well. So aviation is facing a real challenge. But despite that, we are saying very clearly, aviation is part of our path to become a net zero company. And aviation must play its role to meet the Paris Agreement. Now, how do we do all of this? I think the trick here is we need to collaborate in a very, very different way going forward. There are different regulating bodies out there. There is lead time. There are investment decisions needed. There is competing investment. We can only spend each dollar once. We can do wind farms, we can do solar panels, or we can do biofuel for trucks. We can do hydrogen. We can only spend it once, which is why talking about collaborating with you, with our customers in the aviation space, we need to understand better what is the level of commitment, what is the degree of really willing to go ahead with us and our peers, let's be honest, yeah, from your side so that we can jointly come up with a plan to decarbonize this industry. That level of collaboration is unprecedented. You could argue 10 years ago we should have done it, we should have started, fair enough. Let's not look back, let's look forward. Going forward, we need to do this in a different way in order to achieve our goal. Now this is happening. Now this is your role to play. This number hopefully is right, hopefully you recognize this number. I've taken it from publicly available sources. $1.4 trillion spent every year on corporate travel. Now your CFO will say, oh, it's a lot of money and we can do something about it. You can also look the other way and say, that is a lot of purchasing power. That is a lot of influencing power. You choose the hotels you stay in. You choose the airlines you fly with. You maybe have a word to say what fuel the airline should burn going forward. $1.4 trillion gives you a seat at the table. That is the role you need to play, and that is what we want to achieve with collaborating with you more closely going forward. This slide I really don't like so much, but I say it, just one quick comment. In various jobs I've done before, at one stage always the question comes up, so why don't we stop all of this? Why don't we stop flying? Why don't we stop using cars? Why don't we stop using ships? That is not an option. It is clearly not an option. We all know how much trust, relationship, deals, wealth, growth, economy, how much we all benefit from doing what we're doing. I think here's the summary on the next slide. Again, this number might be 80-20 right, wrong. It is such an enormous amount of wealth and growth generated by aviation in one way or another that we just can't stop doing this. But what we need to do is, together, we need to continue flying, continue supplying the industry, continue working together, and whilst we do this, we need to emit less carbon. So we need to do it more sustainably. In terms of how, I said electrification is not out there for the next foreseeable future, hydrogen as well. We asked 100 aviation leaders, and we reached out to 6,000 business travelers, professional people. And we came up with a list of 10-ish, 12 levers. What can we do in order to decarbonize aviation, in order to decarbonize travel? And in particular, two main levers, and this is not a surprise for you, we've come up with. One being sustainable aviation fuel. A lot of talk about that product here in all the various rooms and all the various syndicate groups. And the other one is long-term customer demand. We should call it long-term predictable customer demand. Let me say a few words about this. Sustainable aviation fuel, probably the best innovation we could think of right now. It is very easily explained, and I don't have a technical background, but even I can explain it. It is using the carbon which is already in the atmosphere, sitting in biomass, in municipality waste, in renewables. It's already there. It gets processed to jet fuel, gets burned in the plane, and goes back in the atmosphere where it was before. And the whole circle starts again. So it doesn't take new carbon out of the ground. This is why it has roughly 80% less CO2 emission in comparison to conventional jet fuel. There are different ways to produce it, different technologies. Some is better, some is not so good, but roughly you can say 80%. That's a real breakthrough. And the good thing is it's a drop-in replacement. You can say the pilot wouldn't even notice. You take the infrastructure you have already in place, you take one unit of conventional jet out, put one unit of SAF into the plane, into the truck, into the pipe, into the depot, same thing. You don't need to do any adjustments, nothing. Now that sounds obviously extremely promising, and it is promising. It is also technically proven, 300,000 flights operated on SAF, nothing happened. So I should have mentioned this at the first point. The problem is with that, it's hardly available. Less than 1% currently of the global jet fuel is SAF. And because of that, it is relatively expensive. Now, in order to overcome this, because it all links together, small production means higher cost means less demand. In order to overcome this, you can call it catch-22, chicken egg, whatever. We have decided as Shell we will be investing so far at 3 different places globally. I'm pretty convinced it's going to be more, but so far 3 different places globally. We will be investing, putting steel into the ground and producing 2 million tons of SAF annually. 2 million tons of SAF by 2025, I should say. That is a lot. It's not enough. Let's be clear, it's not enough, but it's a very, very big step forward because it is 10 times the amount globally available right now, here and today. So 10 times more than we have. And one step further, by 2030, we're aiming to have 10% of our global jet fuel sales being SAF. So that is our pathway. We want to go this together with you. The second lever, you remember, I said SAF being number one. The second lever is long-term predictable demand. That is where your role comes in. The investments we are doing, and honestly speaking, others as well, the investments need certainty. We have lead times. We need to understand better who is willing to cooperate, who is willing to go down this path with us. We have not all the answers today, but since there is a lack of alternatives, this is the only way we want to go with our customers in the foreseeable future. We need to engage with you and work closely together and understand your demand going forward better in order to achieve this, our net zero emissions. It was exactly 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Please welcome back to the stage Suzanne Neufong.
Wow. Thank you, Jan, for that incredible introduction to this absolutely critical topic for our entire industry. And I'm so glad the room is full for this, because this has never been a more important time. We will continue the conversation now with an esteemed panel on ways to unlock and increase our access to sustainable options, including SAF, within business travel and aviation, something that we all in this room know a lot about. So let's have the panelists join me now. Please welcome them all to the GBTA main stage. Yes. All right. Welcome, welcome. Let me introduce you. To my right, Anna Mascolo, President of Shell Aviation, here from Europe. Thank you so much. Also from Europe, Paul Abbott, CEO of American Express Global Business Travel. All the way on the end, Doreen Burse, who is Senior Vice President of Global Sales for United Airlines. And all the way on our left, Emily Weiss, who is Managing Director and Global Travel Industry Lead for Accenture, representing the buyer perspective. So all of you have in Emily a great voice today. So it is with, with COP26 in Glasgow just concluding, this topic is on the world stage, and I'm so glad that we have it here today. It has never been really something that we've talked about on this main stage at this convention, and thus we have a momentous time that we get to pick your brains on what this is, how we can go forward. And there is a quote that we talked about, or at least a quoted statistic that we were talking about when we prepped, which was that if we do nothing, the full aviation sector could be responsible for up to 22% of carbon output of the whole world's carbon by 2050. Again, business travel is just a subset of aviation. That's very important for us to note, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. But that would be the worst that could happen to us if we do nothing. So as we think about what we can do as an industry, which Jan already led us into, we will talk about why we're even here today talking about this. So I think with that, let's get started. So our first topic is really about the urgent need to decarbonize business travel. So Anna, let me start with you. So 68% of people globally believe that businesses not acting on climate change are failing their employees and customers, which is all the way to the end of the value chain, which I think is very significant. How can the business travel sector then maintain its social license to operate, given that statistic, while continuing to drive growth and prosperity?
Yeah, so first of all, let me say I'm delighted to be here today and be able to talk about this, and it is an important topic. I think, as you're rightly saying, I think there is a real buzz and a real sense of urgency that for the industry to continue to thrive, we need actually to be able to fly and also emit less. And there is greater societal awareness, COP26, but before that, we've had many discussions and opinions where aviation has been at the center. Now you're looking at 2 to 3% emissions overall globally, so you would say it's almost an unfair share. But the reality is if we do nothing, you almost lose your license to operate. You lose your license to be able to do business. And during COVID times, 75% of business travel stopped. We all kind of learned to cope with it, frankly, and be able to still do business. But we do see even, we are all here and it's fantastic to be face to face. We do see that there is we see the benefits of meeting people face to face. Maybe we have also learned to travel more responsibly. So the one-day trips will be maybe something that we will think about twice doing and maybe combine travel in a more responsible way. Now, as we are coming back from COVID, I think businesses are expecting a green recovery. And also, I think the other thing that we are seeing as a trend is that sustainability is a CEO and a board discussion. So for people in this room, it is an opportunity to bring procurement of jet fuel or SAF as a strategic priority in your day-to-day business. And as Shell, we are here to help solve the challenges that the industry is having and play a part in our role.
Paul, how would you think you're a longtime member of this industry? Anna is brand new to this industry, at least from the perspective on stage. Do you have more to add to what Anna spoke about?
Well, yeah, look, sure. I think, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. And look, we've all experienced a world without travel these last 18 months. And we've experienced a world where we haven't been able to bring people together in person. And we haven't been able to unite colleagues and families and friends. And it's a much diminished world. The world is less prosperous. The world is less tolerant. The world is less understanding. And I think that the world is definitely less interesting without travel. And so, I think we certainly believe that travel has the power to really drive progress. And we see it. We see it driving economic progress, and I think Jan shared some very interesting statistics there, 3.5 trillion in GDP. Travel drives social progress. Bringing people together, it really changes everything. It builds relationships, it builds tolerance, it builds respect, it builds knowledge, it builds understanding. So, I think we all appreciate and value travel, but travel also has to drive environmental progress. I mean, there's no question about that. And we have a tremendous responsibility. If we want to enjoy all those benefits that I just discussed, we have a tremendous responsibility to make sure we reinvent the industry to travel more responsibly. And I genuinely believe that this community, with 1.4 trillion of spend, frankly, has more influence to decarbonize travel and to decarbonize aviation than any other community in the travel industry, and I think we should accept that challenge.
We will talk a lot more about that. Thank you, that's a great point. I think we spoke yesterday about progress, not perfection. That's probably the buzzword for this area as well. Doreen, you represent a really important part of this topic, aviation. What would you have to say to that question?
Well, I think we've all talked about the fact that human connections and relationships and even the experience we've had while we've been here is incredibly important. And it's the way that business gets done. As an airline, we see our role as really uniting folks and getting them to where they need to be, but we also recognize the important role we play in decarbonization. If in the travel sector, it's very easy to measure cost and emissions, but it's less easy to measure the success and the benefits that come from travel, or what were the deals that got done. And so when I think about it from an airline perspective too, never has there been more expectations from travelers, from the government, from our stakeholders. But the one thing I'm really encouraged by is you're seeing the aviation community actually rally with renewed energy around decarbonization and the things that we're working on with partners across the board.
We'll talk about that more as well. I think that's a very important point, that the aviation industry is coming along, even as we're discussing this here. Emily, buyer, consultant, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. A lot of what Doreen just said, and Anna and Paul as well, but it's very easy, or it would be very easy to just say, let's not travel. That's the easiest solution. I don't think that is the solution. Paul hit on a very good reason for that. But what's also important, and especially during the COVID era, is our employees have new expectations and they have new demands of the corporates. And so we could say we want to reduce costs, we want to reduce our carbon emissions, we want to make these smart decisions, but it's not just about that. It's about being a responsible player in the value chain. It's about listening to our shareholders, it's about our stakeholders, it's about listening to our employees and making new decisions around traveling responsibly, around traveling and making climate smart decisions. And I think that's the most important part. As we go and talk more, we'll be continuing to talk about the collaboration and the role that every player has in this.
Well, and I think the way that you frame that answer, I'm going to give you first shot at the next question, which is about the benefits for travel buyers and helping to drive that transition. We have so many, raise your hand if you're a travel buyer. All right, they're scattered all over the room. We know you're there. So what are the benefits for travel buyers to drive this transition to a more sustainable future from where they sit?
Yeah, I think very simply, it's about being part of the solution. As a travel buyer, as a corporate, you can be part of making the solution, of creating the solution, of signaling the demand. So at Accenture, for example, we signed the WEF's Clean Skies Pledge. Right? And that was our way of signaling to the airlines, to Shell, to the others, that we are committed. It's about making sure that everybody is aware of the importance of these decisions, about being part of that entire value chain and really hitting those levers that Jan spoke about. And for me, that's probably the most important. I'd say the second one as a travel buyer is about educating and informing and equipping your employees with decisions. So we have a carbon calculator, for example, that allows our employees to make wiser, smarter, more responsible decisions. And I believe that is something that if we can all say that we're contributing in that way, we'll be a part of that broader ecosystem to lead to the outcome that we're all striving for.
Those are great points. Paul, your follow-on, you represent a lot of travel buyers. How do you collect that and teach them?
I think in terms of the opportunity for the travel buyer, I mean, how often in your career does something come along where you can make a massive difference to society and the industry and your company and impress the C-suite, right? I mean, that's a pretty good opportunity, right? That doesn't come along very often. So, you know, I think, you know, if I was a travel buyer, I'd be grabbing that with both hands. You know, I think, you know, one of the things that we have to do, well, first of all, start with the numbers, right? I mean, aviation, I think the Shell study, 2 to 3% of emissions globally. I think Accenture was 2.5% of emissions. So, you know, let's just say it's in that zone. But, you know, 70% of that is passenger aviation. 30% of it is cargo and military. And of that 70% that's passenger aviation, business travel is 20%. So business travel is a smaller proportion of aviation. However, we can't decarbonize business travel. We have to decarbonize travel. We have to decarbonize aviation. What unique opportunity I think travel buyers have is to punch significantly above our weight. We might be 20% of the emissions, but I think we can be 90% of the influence, because we can bring in this room 1.4 trillion of spend. We can bring the most important companies in the industry together in this room. We can bring those buyers together in this room. You can't do that with hundreds of millions of consumers traveling on leisure. So I think there's this collective responsibility to really lead the change. But I think just picking up on Emily's point, we've got to make it easier for travel buyers. You know, easier to track emissions, easier to measure emissions, easier to influence choice at the point of sale, whether it's, you know, in the online booking tool or through the travel management channel or through the airline channel. We've got to make it easier to actually purchase sustainable aviation fuels. We've got to make it, much, much easier for travel managers to track their progress against the sustainability targets. And those are the things we're focused on, right? Trying to make it easier, because the will is there, right? The will is there in this room. And people are saying, how do we make it easier? How do we make a difference?
Well, I know you're part of this great founding Partners in Aviation, as is United Airlines. My thanks to you, because GBTA has a role to play in this as well.
Absolutely.
And I spoke on stage yesterday to the people that were in the room about tourism always gets most of the attention from government and media because travel is all about tourism. And yet, what Paul just said, we could have a 90% influence on this solving this problem, which I think is really fantastic. Doreen, airline perspective, from a travel buyer perspective, you meet with customers as well. What advice would you give to your travel buyer audience?
I appreciate that question, and I would just add to what Emily and Paul said in that the travel buyers we know that it's of interest because we've been meeting with literally hundreds of them over the last couple of months as people are gearing up for travel to come back. And what they are also talking about is never before has the traveler been more educated about climate and what the impacts are. And they're vocal about what their expectations are as it relates to who business is being done with and the ways that they expect we are also addressing those things. And so I think partnership is powerful. It allows us to all work together to do what is probably the most significant thing that I think Paul mentioned, which is educate folks about not only where we're at and where we have to go, but there are a lot of great things that are being done across a lot of industries and a lot of, whether it's suppliers or customers, that we should be talking about and capitalizing on so that we can continue to perpetuate that.
All great points. We'll shift a little bit now, because if this were easy to do, we would have done it. So we have to talk a little bit about why it's been so difficult. So let's shift to navigating that flight path, no pun intended, to a net zero aviation sector. Paul, you said air travel as a whole represents currently, the whole air travel, 2 to 3% of global carbon emissions. So why has it been so difficult, Anna, for aviation to reduce emissions? And what is the most important thing to tackle first as we go forward?
Yeah, so I think, great question. I think we start, as I said, with a 2 to 3%, and everybody's saying, oh, why are you making such a fuss? It's only 2 to 3%. I think the reality is that, well, aviation is a hard to decarbonize sector. So it's behind other sectors, which means that this number actually, in the relative terms, becomes much more meaningful over time. So you're looking at 1 billion tons of emission today that could be doubled by 2050 if we do nothing. And to give you a couple of numbers and statistics, I think we published a decarbonization report in September. In relative terms, because other sectors will go ahead, that 2 to 3% can be 22%, so a very sizable number. Or, again, we have an internal Shell Sky scenario that looks at passengers' emissions versus, flying versus cars in simple terms. Again, if we do nothing, the emissions from flying will overtake passenger cars by 2060. So I think clearly, staying still is not an option. And at Shell, we are working in different sectors, and we are taking what we call a sectorial approach, trying to really look at the sectors that have, I would say, they're more difficult. That's why they're called hard to decarbonize, because they require high capex investments. Electrification is not an easy option. They don't have, in some cases, policies and frameworks, what we call the rules of the game. The markets are not clear. There are also international, like shipping, aviation, commercial road transports. You would have all of this have common areas that make it just more difficult. So I think when you are then targeting emission, you need to be much more focused. So for aviation, what are the solutions? I think, first of all, I do want to recognize that the industry has done an enormous amount over time. And I think it's not publicized sometimes a lot, but the airlines especially over time have reduced emission through operational efficiencies. But that has been fantastic, frankly. Not enough for the growth that is coming. We also look at our own operational efficiencies on the ground, what we call Scope 1 and Scope 2, that Jan was mentioning. But then you say, okay, once this is done, again, because of the growth of the industry, you need to look into what we call reduction measures. And then you start looking around the technology. So you're looking at batteries, and you're saying, well, battery possible maybe in 10, 15 years' time, but only for small planes, short distances, because batteries are heavy. So the physics are there, not to be able to fly for very long. Then you're looking also at hydrogen. Hydrogen, fantastic, because you can use this for propulsion, you can use it to produce SAF, sustainable aviation fuels, you can use it in many ways. But again, if I use for propulsion in a plane, actually you're starting to have an issue around volume, and you need to redesign your planes. And which is not an easy thing to do, because planes have a 30 years life cycle. You also need to think about, how do I bring the hydrogen to the plane? So it requires recreating the airport's infrastructure. So again, it is an option, but coming at a later stage. And then if you're looking, okay, what do I have today that actually I can use now? It's available, not at scale, it's available from different technology. It's really sustainable aviation fuels. And we see that this is the main in-sector lever to really make a difference, because the energy content, the fact that there are different technologies where you can get SAF, and also the fact that you don't have to change fundamentally the infrastructure, make it much easier. So I hope nobody has now a PhD in sustainable aviation fuels, but I wanted to give you a sense of the challenges, the practical challenges the industry has.
Again, if it were easy, we would have done it already. I know United's made some headlines about what you've been thinking about in this area. What would you add to what Anna spoke about already, Doreen?
I'd add to the great comments that we, as an airline, we recognize the way we contribute to climate change, and therefore our responsibility to actually help solve it. We've made some bold commitments with the commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 100% by the year 2050. In addition, we've made another commitment to reduce our carbon intensity by 50% compared to 2019 by the year 2035, because what we recognize is there needs to be progress before 2050. We're seeing industries collaborate with industries to really affect change. I think that's a real positive thing. But one other thing I want to call out is we are very specific about not using carbon offsets to actually reduce our greenhouse gases. We believe that our customers and really the planet deserves more than business as usual in paying others so that we can continue to pollute. And so we remain very committed to doing that.
Okay, offsets, first time we've talked about it today. So that's an unusual thing that it took so long to say that word. Emily, your thoughts about why it's so difficult, why we can't just do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one very simple fact, is just the availability. I mean, Anna talked about it.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so we can make a commitment and we can signal demand, but the reality is, I heard a statistic, and I want to be careful about saying it, but that if every one of the airlines used every bit of SAF that exists, they could fly for 15 hours, I believe. It was something.
That's it.
That's it. So the point here is, and please, if that statistic isn't exactly right, it's directional.
It's indicative, yes.
But the point being is, SAF's just not as available, and it's expensive. And right now, this industry is coming out of a pandemic that really, decimated it in many ways, and therefore, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. That being said, there is a commitment. I think what Doreen said is perfect. I'd like to say on behalf of Accenture, but really on behalf of corporates, we have a net zero goal for 2025. We know the importance of it. We know that SAF isn't going to solve everything, but we know that it's going to be a big component to it. And therefore, we have to be thinking about all of the other levers that are available to us, but also educating and informing our employees. And candidly, and I think I can say this for many corporates, our employees are informing us. They're making demands unlike in the past. And so I think if it were so easy, the SAF would be more readily available. If it were so easy, there'd be other solutions out there. I mean, Anna talked about hydrogen. Well, there's risks. There's risks, and there's infrastructure changes, and it doesn't happen overnight. But everybody is committed as an ecosystem, and we talked a lot about collaboration. And that, to me, is the most encouraging part right now. I mean, I come from a company and an industry where travel is such a huge part of what we do. I can assure you, we will not travel the way we used to. I will not be flying across the pond or across the country for a 1-hour meeting, probably ever again, but I will still be traveling. I still will be with my clients. I may be making less trips for a longer duration, so I have less takeoffs and less landings, but I'm still committed, and I'm going to, travel, and I'm going to be with our clients and with our colleagues and our partners, but in a much more responsible, smarter way.
I think the byword that I just heard you say was investment as well. So it's investing in education, investing in what you're hearing from your travelers.
And equipping our employees to make smarter decisions.
Yeah. And it may need investment of other kinds, capital investments at some point as well. And price is one factor, but procurement out there always thinks about value in terms of value rather than just price. I think we've been trying to educate ourselves on the difference between value and price. And that then brings me to you, Paul, which is what is the big promise of SAF then for our industry, either today or in 5 years? And you've made some announcements about SAF and what it means to the way that you strategically run your business for your customers as well. So talk to us about what SAF means for you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I want to make one comment on the difficulties, if I may. And really, I'd like to make more of a glass half full comment rather than half empty. I mean, I appreciate it is complex, but some people, they look at this huge, complex travel ecosystem and think, where do I start? But it is concentrated. Right? We have 2 engine manufacturers that have 75% market share. We have 2 airplane manufacturers, 90% market share. We have 25 airlines, 50% share. We have 25 airports that represent 50% of passenger numbers. So start to break the problem down. That's 40 to 50 companies. So 40 to 50 companies now decide to make a step change in the logistics, that relate to sustainable aviation fuels, in the manufacturing, in the improvement in engine technology, in the improvement in the aerodynamic performance of aircraft, and you can make a huge difference. A huge difference. So I think we have to break the problem down, and I think this the same thing for the travel manager. You look at sort of net zero by 2050, and it's very difficult to get your head around it. So, okay, 2030, maybe it's a 30% reduction. And then we have a product called Green Compass that we've launched this week, which is, as the name suggests, it helps you chart a course to your target. And you say, how do I get to 30% by 2030? And for Accenture, that's maybe not enough, but for other organizations, maybe it is. And you say, well, I'm going to get maybe 1 to 2% per annum from aircraft that are more fuel efficient. Aerodynamic aircraft and engine manufacturing. Okay, over 9 years, that gets me 15 to 20%. So I've got a 10% gap. I can make some policy changes. I can substitute air for rail on some short-haul routes. And now, okay, I've got a 5% gap, I've got a 10% gap. Sustainable aviation fuels, right? Sustainable aviation fuels is then the lever to really fill that gap. It doesn't have to become 50% of your travel, but I think we'd all like it to be 10% of our travel by 2030. And together with the other levers we have, we can deliver meaningful change, right? 30% plus change. So I hope that helps, right? That's how I'd be thinking about it if I was a travel buyer. I'd be breaking it down. I'd be chatting to, our consulting team, helping, or Accenture's consulting team, helping go through that process with Green Compass and build that roadmap. Because it's easy to talk about the things that can't be done, but there are a lot of things that can be done.
Which brings me to Shell. You produce SAF. So as you think about the opportunity for SAF to solve this problem, I know we got a great education and an introduction by Jan. What would you add to Shell and other energy companies' opportunity to make the biggest difference, to fill that gap, but then to also make the future more real, faster?
Yeah, so I think, look, it's a complex and simple problem at the same time, in a way, because we know sustainable aviation fuels will make a difference, is a drop-in. It provides for strong carbon reductions up to 80% on a life cycle. There are different technologies, but I think it becomes a supply and demand challenge. And I think you need to be able to bring together both sides of the equation hand in hand to make the problem, to break down the problem in different chunks so that you can resolve it along the way. So I can talk a little bit about the supply side and also maybe challenge the thinking on the demand side. So on the supply side, look, we have been working as an energy company on a number of technologies for sustainable aviation fuels. The ones that are working today and are effective, but also the ones that will work in the future. So, and here again, without becoming expert in sustainable aviation fuels, I think Jan was mentioning this, it comes down to starting from technology of today, use cooking oil, but then looking at, for example, into ethanol to jet, or looking at waste material into jet, or power to liquids to jet. Power to liquids would be really hydrogen, renewable energy, and water. And recycled carbon. So you're really looking at bringing all the different elements together to really reduce the emissions in a more and more sustainable way. But each of these technology comes at a cost. And the cost is unfortunately high. Sustainability does come at a cost, between 2 to 8 times more expensive than what it is today. So it is a real challenge. But we are working on all of these because all of these are needed for the scale of the demand we see in the future, because all of them have some constraints at some point, so you will need to add to it. And we have made, from the supply side, we have made a clear commitment from our side. So again, Jan mentioned by 2025, our aim is to produce 2 million tons of SAF, so 10 times what is produced globally today by everybody else. Is that enough? No, it's not enough, and we expect other people to come to the table, and maybe the demand we will receive from our customers will make us even push that number up. That's my hope.
That's your challenge.
That's a challenge. And also, we're looking at selling at least 10% of our fuels in aviation as SAF. And in the broader Shell context, because I want also to give a broader context around Shell, Shell will reduce the sale of its traditional fuels, that's not only jet, diesel and so on, when you're going to fuel your car, by 55% by 2030. So there is a bigger transformation as a company we are into. So we have announced also a first biofuel plant. It's one of the biggest plants in Europe, in our energy and chemical park in Rotterdam. There are more announcements to come. I won't be able to share them all, but in any case, there is a whole pipeline. Now, on the demand side, I do think that when we're looking at the demand for aviation, at least for the next coming years, the cargo business and corporate travel are the two places where we can really make a difference. And then if I dive into the corporate demand, I think it's a very concentrated business, a little bit what Paul was saying. So with top 200 companies are 16% of the overall air travel. And you can reach them easily rather than going and knocking at the door of everybody's booking a flight. So I think there is a real power of bringing this room together and to make a difference. And we at Shell, we are also corporate travelers ourselves. So we also look into this. And again, our aim is, for example, to reduce our corporate travel emissions by 45% by 2030. Of course, if supply is there, you can argue, well, if you don't know Shell, we would have a good handle into this. But my view is, whatever is your ambition, start putting that ambition on paper. Start mobilizing your organization towards a path towards net zero.
So SAF, as part of that, very important, more supply soon. That's all very promising. Practically, from an airline perspective, Doreen, does that sound like music to your ears, or do you have other things we need to know about?
It does. And I want to add a perspective from the airline that actually complements the great comments that we've already heard. We've already mentioned that addressing sustainability is by tackling the biggest culprit, which is airline emissions. I joined United Airlines about 7 months ago, and I did a lot of research before I joined about the things they were working on, and I learned so much about what they were doing in the sustainability space. And in fact, what I also learned is that they have been investing in SAF for more than a decade. and have nearly twice the world's publicly announced SAF commitments as the rest of the airline industry. And there's a point I want to make here. Suzanne, you mentioned COP26. Because of the long-term investment and the bold actions that have been taken, the United Airlines was the only major airline invited to attend COP26 in Glasgow, where world leaders met to talk about climate change and the importance of everyone coming together to do that. But a few things, and I've shared this with clients, and it was something I didn't know, and I think it's worth illustrating, and then I promise I have a point on this. So in 2009, we were the first airline to fly the first SAF test flight. In 2011, we flew the first SAF passenger flight. By 2015, we made the largest airline investment in SAF producer, Fulcrum Bioenergy. And in 2016, we started to use SAF on an ongoing basis. In fact, out of LAX, every United flight is SAF fueled. In this year, we invested in Alder Fuels to advance SAF production, the next generation of SAF, Archer Aviation to scale up urban air mobility, and aerospace. We hold today 70% of all publicly announced purchase commitments for SAF. But the point is, and I think the point was made earlier, it's less than 0.1% of our total supply.
Yeah.
There is still a major supply gap. I was saying to Anna earlier, I'm so honored to sit here next to a major energy company that is getting into this space and helping with the production beyond the startups. That's what's going to make a difference.
I think we need to give a round of applause to that. Thank you, Shel.
So if you allow me to comment on
Absolutely.
this one, I think we've been on a real journey on this for the last years, and I think at some point, and I remember when I started this journey, there were even challenges around should an oil major step into this space, and actually I would argue that if it is not a company like Shell, who has got the size, the scale, the customer reach to make that change? And today, we don't produce SAF, by the way, today, but we are one of the major suppliers of SAF. So we buy from third party, we work with startups, and we have worked over the years with a number of startups looking at different technologies. We've invested in LanzaJet. We've invested in Enerchem technology. So it's not only what Shell does, but also what we enable. And it's a major part of actually the role we have, as well as our own production commitments.
Thanks for clarifying. That was a really good point. Thank you. I think as we start to wrap this up, the point was made before by Emily about collaboration. That collaboration, we talked about C words yesterday, I think, is when we talked about the 3 C's and something. Collaboration is so important. So how can this community collaborate? Let me start with Emily. Collaborate to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, as a travel buyer, one of the first steps in collaboration is looking at who your partners are. So I talked about the ecosystem, but it's making, again, I said making smarter decisions, but looking at who are your suppliers, looking at who are the partners that you're involved with, and are they also making commitments? Are they also committed to net zero, and utilizing them across the entire value chain to come and make sure that everybody's aligned with the same outcomes? And I think that is where the collaboration comes, which is no one's going to be able to get this done alone. I think Doreen said it very well. The airlines can make all the commitments that they want, but if the supply isn't there. Shell can do everything that they want to do, but if the demand isn't there. So there's so many different players and so many different levers across the whole value chain that from a collaboration, you need to be thoughtful about who are you collaborating with, why are you collaborating with them, and what are the expectations you have of those you are collaborating with.
Feels a little bit like we're in an Economics 101 live experiment.
Perhaps.
Yeah. We as an industry, I think this is the moment, right?
Yeah.
Paul, where do we go from here?
Well, we've got to break this loop, and collaboration will break the loop. I mean, I know it's been mentioned, but you know, we're in a situation, we sit at the travel, in the sort of center of the travel ecosystem, and you know, we bring some of the biggest buyers in the world and some of the biggest suppliers in the world together. But we're in this situation where, yes, Shell need to invest billions of dollars in production, but they want to know, you know, is there the demand? So we speak to the buyers and they say, well, you know, it's very expensive. You know, it's 8 times more expensive. How do we get the price down? We go back to Shell and they say, well, we need more demand. And, you know, so, you know, we are in this loop where, you know, we can't all point at each other. You know, we've got to get in a room and hammer it out. And buyers have got to make long-term commitments. Buyers have to make long-term commitments to purchase sustainable aviation fuel. Producers are going to have to make long-term investments to produce more, and to produce it more at scale to reach a price point that buyers, are going to actually accept. And everyone's going to have to accept that they're going to have to pay for it. Travel management companies, customers, airlines, everyone's going to have to make a contribution, because nobody can shoulder the entire economic burden of moving to SAF.
Right.
So we have to figure out who's going to pay for it, and everyone's going to have to share in that.
I mean, the thought occurred to me of a consumer example of, we paid a lot of money for those huge brick mobile phones at one point, and the cost was high and we still bought them. There was value. So as we think about, then the cost went down and the tech became better, that over time this will solve itself if the demand is there.
There will be that inflection point.
Yeah.
There's no question about it, where we're going to cross, and all of a sudden, SAF's actually going to be the less expensive. It's going to take time, but it's about commitment. And we said collaboration, that I think that all the travel buyers here, and I think that all of the corporates need to say, what is our plan? And we talked about a roadmap. What is your roadmap to get to net zero, and what are the factors that need to be taken into consideration? And when everyone has clarity on that, I believe that there's going to be that path forward, and everyone's going to come together, and we will pass that inflection point.
Clarity, commitment, collaboration,
Back
lots
to
of
the
C
Cs.
words there. Thank you. Anna, you also talked about collaboration with other suppliers, which I think is really great for us to learn as well. So if you could round this out, what would your advice be for how collaboration here in this room and beyond, those watching live stream as well, what should travel buyers take home about the collaboration opportunity?
So we talk often about all parties, all measures working together, because you need to have everybody's coming. These are difficult problems to solve, and you need to have all parties from the different parts of the value chains coming together, trying to bring the different perspective. And I value particularly the collaboration we have actually with Amex GBT in trying to bring this producer-supplier perspective, but also the purchasing power of the people in this room through Amex. And I find that a valuable collaboration, and it's very innovative, but it comes with challenges, because we were sitting together with Paul this morning, and we are like, nobody has done this before. so in a way, you need to have a leap of faith and try and test and have some answers, and some you will figure out along the way. I think for everybody in this room, maybe my thought is about really thinking about sustainability is a license to operate. It's not something that you're doing as one of your priorities. It needs to be a pillar. It is your as I said, your license to operate as organizations. So it needs to be well embedded in your company strategies. And then it comes down to ambitions, targets, baby steps, long-term plans, and working with companies like Amex, like Shell, and all the other parties here in this room, actually, because everybody's got a role to play, the airlines too. And, again, with Accenture, you are bringing, again, the corporate demand to the table. So I think everybody needs to have a role to play here.
And learn from each other.
And learn from each other, with a bit of humility, if I also may say, along the way.
We are suddenly in our last 5 minutes, and I told everybody there would be like a fast-paced last question. That fast-paced last question is really, can either be one closing thought that you want to leave all of these, 3,500 people with, or one practical step every practitioner can take home with them. And for this, I'll start with Paul.
I'm going to do it real quick, but I'd say we talked about SAF, and for some people that may feel in the medium long term, and there is complexity there, but there are things you can do today. Okay. So, definitely, first of all, track and measure. If you can't measure something, you can't manage it. So step one, make sure you've got the measurements in place. Step two, influence choice. Let's get carbon emissions on the itineraries, get carbon emissions in the online booking tools, let's get carbon emissions in all channels, let's give the traveler visibility and awareness over choice. Procure green, right? Get sustainability into your procurement practices. Make sure that you're adapting your policies to ensure that you're really procuring green. I think, I do believe offsets have a role to play, and I respect Doreen's comments there, but offsets play an important role channeling funding to really important initiatives. COP26, 100 world leaders signed a commitment to basically halt and reverse deforestation. Some of those offsets go to causes that are making a real positive difference there. So I would encourage people to say, look, it's not the silver bullet, but it is making a difference as long as it's high quality, credible offsets. And look, the last one is just set that 2050 target, set a bold ambition, and join the journey, and we'll figure it out together.
There are so many good words that are part of the travel vernacular. Journey is really part of this today. Doreen, let me go next to you. What's your final thought?
So I have a thought and a half. So the first is I would be remiss not to mention the United Airlines EcoSkies Alliance. We have about 12 or 14 corporations that have committed to buying the SAF premium. I would note that this is not something we monetize. We don't make money on it. It's about giving an opportunity to decarbonize travel for those corporates. But the last thing I would say, and I thought a lot about this, is as suppliers and as businesses, there are a lot of places we could compete. Sustainability should not be one of them.
Agreed. Hear, hear.
I think that deserves a round of applause, everybody, because we don't often have people up here agreeing on something so profound. Emily next, and I'll let Shell have the last word. So Emily.
I think I just want to repeat something that we've all said, and I specifically said, is it's really, we all have an obligation to travel more responsibly and to make climate smart decisions. I think it's really that simple. And as corporates here, we need to come together and back to the word of collaboration and be thinking in that way. And together we can really make an impact and be proud of the impact that we'll make.
Do we take that also into our tourism travel? We are all tourists.
As individuals, I say this as corporates because of the audience here, but I think as individuals, as members of this, the society of this planet, we all have this obligation right now, and we can make climate smart choices. And as corporates, we can equip our employees to make those choices, and our leisure travelers as well.
Because the mindset, we don't turn it off when we leave the office.
No,
right?
not at all. I mean, candidly, all corporate travelers are leisure travelers, and we don't forget that.
So it's a two-way.
Absolutely.
Anna, last word.
Yeah, so the last word, I think, first of all, Doreen, I think your point is absolutely fantastic around there is no competition. We are not running a race all on our own. We are all together in this, and competition does not make sense in the sustainability space. United has played a fantastic leadership role in this space. You have a long list of achievements, and I think that speaks for itself. When we look at sustainability and how to tackle it, we split it into avoid, reduce, and offset. So avoid it would be the operational efficiencies, but also maybe a behavioral thing. When we are going to be traveling in the future, we need to travel responsibly. And maybe that one-day trip for 1 hour meeting, maybe we don't do it and we use Microsoft Teams and the tools available. Because most of the emissions are actually at takeoff and landing. So we do need to think about behaviors. Then on the reduction measures, I think we have talked about SAF. We are committed as a producer and as a supplier. We look at you in this room also to show your commitment on the demand side and work with us. I would say also come and see our booth and the Amex GBT booth. We can start the conversation there. And then as a third lever, and I do stress is a third lever, and I sympathize with the point from United, when you've explored everything else, I think offsetting and high quality offsetting, it's a signal that this matters to the industry. And it's important that each one of us is signaling that this matters. And I stop here. Thank you.
So with that, we have had a fantastic journey today. It's been an intro session for me as well, certainly as I'm learning a lot about this topic. You will learn a lot more about this in the weeks and months to come. I want to thank all of you, Doreen, Anna, Paul, and Emily.
Thank you.
And we'll have more to speak about in the near future. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We'll go. Off that way. Thank you. Wow. I feel like I've had a semester worth of education just preparing for that panel, but it's also something that we have a lot more to learn about and a lot more action to take as an industry. We also have a great opportunity to think about what is the next 20 or 30 years to look like, and I thought it would be really fun for us to, here's the here and now, a little bit of future, but I wanted to end this session with what is beyond our dreams, already available today in aviation, to think about a sustainable future for that. Of course, I want to thank Shell for making this whole session possible. And again, because sustainability has never been on the main stage before, we have a long journey ahead of us as we go ahead. And there are near-term solutions such as SAF. Find out more about it. Stop at the expo in the booths of Shell or American Express, GBT, or United Airlines, or any of the airlines here. And there are others in the audience, I know, that come from some sustainable aviation fuel producing companies. For the first time, we have sustainability people in our audience, so we're really thrilled that you're here with us as well, and we would invite you to join everything possible you can do with GBTA in the future. And we'll solve those issues such as supply and cost. Demand from you will help solve some of that journey. So this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end. And as we discussed, there are some long-term solutions that we talked about here on the horizon, and they give us hope and optimism for what will be possible. So that's where we shift now as we close out this session, a really important innovation topic about how aviation changes what we eventually do in our day jobs and get travelers where they need to go. So here next to take us through some very exciting developments related to sustainable aviation in particular is our keynote speaker for the session, who is Miles O'Brien. Miles is an award-winning independent journalist and science correspondent and filmmaker for PBS, and for those of you not for the United States, that's America's Public Broadcasting System. He is a former anchor and correspondent for CNN as well. His recent film for the weekly PBS science program, Nova, was all about the future and science of aviation innovation, and he's here to share those insights with us today. Everyone, please welcome Miles O'Brien to the GBTA stage.
How are you all? It's good to see you. GBTA, great to be traveling again, right? After 2 years of Zooming, it was nice to go to storage and break out the pants. But it is good it's great. I mean, going to the hotel and seeing all the badge people walking around, no masks, it's a little weird. It's kind of surreal, but it's good to be back out in the world. What a great panel that was, giving us all a sense of what the near term is as far as getting aviation into the realm of at least carbon neutral and on its road to zero carbon. Down the road, and maybe closer than you might think, we're talking about electric. And of course, at the root of all this is our concern about the climate emergency. It's here and now, we know it. The greenhouse gas carbon dioxide is at its highest level that it has been in 800,000 years. Existential crisis. Globally, about 15% of the human carbon footprint comes from transportation writ large. And we see some signs of progress. Electric car sales are rising as prices drop. But as was discussed earlier, aviation, this is the tough one to solve. Yet, all over the world, as I discovered in the course of doing a documentary for Nova, so this is a bit of a shameless plug, which released in May and which you can stream anywhere you like, called The Great Electric Airplane Race, engineers, entrepreneurs, aviators are rising to meet the challenge of electric aviation. They are rethinking how an aircraft is designed in fundamental ways, because electric motors are small and yet powerful and responsive. The motors can be distributed all over the aircraft, and they can replace control surfaces like ailerons, stabilizers, and rudders. The motors reduce drag. They're much more efficient. And this group of people are experimenting small, creating some flying machines like never seen before. I believe it's going to happen sooner than most people imagine. If you fly on small commuter airlines today, you can expect some version of electric aircraft within the next 5 years. All right, I got ahead on the pie here. Let's take a look at the pie. Before the pandemic, I don't have to tell you people, aviation accounted for about 3.5% of the world's climate warming problem. About 2/3 of jet fuel exhaust is CO2. Less than 1% are nitrogen oxides, which also cause warming. And the other third is mostly water vapor, which at high altitude creates contrails, ice crystals. And when the humidity is right, the contrails can spread and linger, creating cirrus clouds for many hours. Thousands of flights creating all those contrail-induced clouds trap a lot of heat. They have about twice the impact on global warming as the CO2 from jet exhaust. The problem is getting worse. Global aviation is growing rapidly. Again, don't need to tell you all that. It is predicted to double in less than 20 years. In stark contrast, other forms of transportation are investing heavily in green alternatives. If that trend continues, aviation is going to become one of the top polluters of all industry sectors. Aviation will become the final dinosaur that doesn't clean up its act if it doesn't act right now. It is quite literally a weighty issue, specifically the weight of jet fuel. Pound for pound, jet fuel's got a lot of BTUs. A Boeing 737 can hold more than 40,000 pounds of fuel. Sounds like a lot. But to replace the jet engines with electric motors, batteries, you would need 30 times that weight, or about 1.2 million pounds of batteries to get comparable range. That plane's not going to fly. Solving the engineering challenge will be daunting, clearly. But first, the baby steps, and they have been taken. In 2003, Bertrand Piccard co-founded the Solar Impulse project based in Switzerland. The goal was to design and build a solar electric aircraft that could fly all around the world. It was about the weight of a car. It flew about as fast as a moped. It transported one pilot, no passengers. Kind of modest in that respect. In the end, it took 16 months. They had quite a series of mishaps. But they did, in fact, circumnavigate the planet. Let's listen to Bertrand Piccard describe it.
What I wanted to do was to show that electric aviation had also a future and that the technologies already exist. It's not something that we can do in 100 years. We can do it now, and actually we did it. Today, all the people who say a clean aviation is impossible will look as stupid as the one who said to the Wright brothers, your airplane will never fly.
So let's go to Chandler Airport in Fresno, California. It has been in operation since the Wright brothers era, aviation 1.0, I guess you could call it. Today, it's kind of lost its Art Deco glory, but there's a guy there by the name of Joseph Oldham who is taking advantage of this underutilized place to help launch a new age of aviation, 3.0, if 2.0 was jets. His hangar is filled with Pipistrel Alpha Electros. They are the first certified all-electric airplanes in the world. He has 4 of them in the hangar, and he was gracious enough to give a fellow pilot, me, a little bit of time in the right seat.
Hey, 4 Alpha Romeo, go ahead and roll. 4 Alpha Romeo rolling.
It's interesting, it doesn't vibrate in the same way.
Yeah, it's just very comfortable and very relaxing. Electric propulsion systems are so simple that really there's just nothing that you really need to be that concerned about.
Are we flying the future right now?
We absolutely are.
It was a hazy day, the result of some raging wildfires nearby. A reminder of the climate emergency, which makes the decarbonization of aviation so urgent.
How important do you think that is to think about taking fossil fuels out of aviation over the long run?
Well, it's huge. It's the only mode of transportation that really has not moved aggressively towards zero emission.
Joseph Oldham. You know, he got the money to purchase those planes by applying for a grant from Fresno County to demonstrate advanced transportation technology. And he believes the planes, along with charging stations at airports within range, not much range, but within range, will do that. The company that makes this airplane, Pipistrel, is based in Slovenia. Pipistrel is a pioneer of electric aviation. The founder, Ivo Boskerol, started tinkering with ultralight trikes in the 1980s. Then behind the Iron Curtain, he had to sneak around at nighttime to do it. Pipistrel is, in his language, means bat because his aircraft flew at night. He designed the planes to be flight trainers for new pilots, and Joseph Oldham is thinking about that as well. He is waiting for FAA approval to start a flight school with these planes, and he thinks the reduced maintenance and no fuel costs will create an opportunity to bring more diversity into aviation. But 2 seats, only an hour of duration before the battery runs out. The Alpha Electro is a case in point of the infancy of all electric aviation. It's a long way from this little guy, which looks like a Playmobil toy my kids had when they were younger, to this, a 737. The flight path between the two may be wending its way through a small hangar in Camarillo, California. This is a small startup company called Ampere, and they've modified a 1974 Cessna 337 Skymaster. It's a twin engine, one pushes, one pulls. They replaced the forward piston engine with an electric motor, and they added a 600-pound battery pack to the belly. It's a hybrid they call EEL, and they've flown it dozens of test flights. The electric motor does most of its work on takeoff and the climb to altitude, and then the piston takes over for the brunt of the cruise and descent. They claim fuel costs are reduced by 20 to 30%, and maintenance bills are cut in half. Now, not long after this test flight, which we documented for the film, they took the EEL to Hawaii, and the company partnered with Mokulele Airlines to see how it handles commuter airline operations, frequent flights, short turnarounds, et cetera. And that's where they say some of the big advantages of a hybrid are because of the charging time issue. Ampere is hoping the next step will be a 19-seater, a Twin Otter converted for electric. It would have electric motors that run on batteries. They would be charged by an internal turbine engine, sort of like an auxiliary power unit idea. And in some of the regional markets, this is going to be a very interesting opportunity because these airlines are going out of business, as you know, because they have such thin margins and high operating costs. Electric aviation could go in the direction of changing that. Now, you've heard a lot about this. Imagine a world filled with flying cars. Haven't we always, ever since we watched the Jetsons? Electric propulsion might deliver the freedom of flight right to our doorsteps, potentially. Now, in China, there's a startup that has been testing the waters. We don't hear too much about them here like we hear about some of the US startups, but they're flying people mostly on short sightseeing tours, no more than about 10 minutes. It's the Ehong 216, that's 2 passengers and 16 propellers. The company claims it can carry 485 pounds, 80 miles an hour for 20 miles. That's not going to change the face of personal transportation, is it? But it has proven there are people willing to get into it without a pilot. The company claims more than 6,000 people have flown so far. Ehong has a lot of competition in this space, as I'm sure you've read about. There are probably about 200 startups at various stages all across the globe that are racing to fill the skies with electric vehicles. Aeronautical engineer Mark Moore sparked a lot of this creative thinking. In 2009, he was at NASA and he designed a concept vehicle seen here called the Puffin. It was a single-person electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicle, eVTOL, And it sort of gave an idea of what it might be. Fanciful, to be sure. Well, one of the people who was fascinated by Puffin was Google co-founder Larry Page. And soon after he saw it, he pulled up the couch cushions in his living room and had enough money to begin investing in personal electric aircraft projects. And he invited, well, one of his people invited us to a ranch south of Silicon Valley to meet a small team from one of those companies, Kitty Hawk. And they are flight testing a single-seat electric aircraft called Heaviside. The company is led by entrepreneur and computer scientist Sebastian Thrun. He invited us for a rare peek and quite a slick pitch. Listen to this.
This might sound crazy, but we believe that's the future of transportation for everybody. If you put the car in the air, there's no obstacle, you're on a straight line, you're not in anyone's way, you don't need roads anymore, you're more energy efficient, you're faster, you're safer. Why would people not want that?
Why not, right? It's an eVTOL. The propellers pivot the thrust from horizontal to vertical. This allows the craft to take off and land on a dime, and they claim it can fly 180 miles an hour. The Kitty Hawk team is flight testing, aiming to be certified for piloted flight by the FAA. It's a single-seater, not built for air taxi kind of operations. They built like 100 functioning prototypes over the last few years. They claim 30,000 flight tests. And Thrun believes the way to reconcile his big dream of a Heaviside in every driveway with safety is automation. He believes people without a full piloting skill set and certification should be able to hop into these vehicles, punch their target address, and get there. Now, Sebastian Thrun is a pioneer in the development of autonomous cars. He is the founder of Google's self-driving car project, Waymo. He says self-flying aircraft, excuse me, are actually an easier challenge. All that stuff you would hit, from a bicyclist to a playing child to your curb, your shrub, that's all on the ground. And once you get up a couple hundred feet, there's nothing to hit. The current leader in the race to build electric air taxis is a company called Joby Aviation, founded by JoBen Bevirt in 2009, Santa Cruz area. The aircraft he and his team designed is now in flight testing for FAA certification as well. It's quite an amazing vehicle. It carries a pilot and 4 passengers, 6 tilting motors. It's good at hovering, and it's good at cruising. Bevirt says it'll do 200 miles an hour, and it has a range of 150 miles. Now, that's starting to change transportation a little more. Joby designs, tests, and builds almost all the components of its aircraft, which gives new meaning to the term vertical integration, I guess. Much of the work was done in secret in a barn, in a secluded property among the redwoods there in Santa Cruz. The goal is to have the aircraft initially certified for flight with a pilot. The aircraft has flown hundreds of times, mostly by remote control. Now, JoBen Bevirt allowed us to watch, but he wouldn't let us film one of their flight tests. I was impressed. It was remarkably quiet, much quieter than a helicopter. On paper, Joby has done well. $6.6 billion when it went public was the value of the company. And they say they'd like to have a certified aircraft by 2023. Of course, we all know how that can go. He says he wants to be comparable in cost to the price of a taxi and bring that cost down to the cost eventually that would be equivalent to personal car ownership in the coming years. Ambitious goals, to be sure, but listen to JoBen.
In order to have the impact that we want to have, in order to transform the way everyone moves every day, we will need to make millions of these. Our mission is to save 1 billion people an hour a day.
1 billion people flying air taxis. Now, how on earth could, or off Earth, could that possibly be safe? Eventually, autonomous air taxis will need to safely fly to and from convenient places, taking off, navigating, landing, dealing with emergencies, all on their own. That's a complex problem, to be sure. At NASA's Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley, they are tackling this problem, the air traffic control challenge. In this world, the idea of a control tower is completely outdated. Before COVID, as you all well know, there were more than 45,000 flights every day in the US alone. And that is an intricate symphony precisely conducted by air traffic controllers. But if eVTOLs take off, as it were, there will be a lot more players, many orders of magnitude more. Sandy Lozito is NASA's chief of the Aviation Systems Division at Ames.
We do not necessarily expect a centralized air traffic control tower to do it with individual directives telling the pilots how to come in and out of the vertiport. And so that's a very different operation. There could be much more independence on the part of the pilots and the individual operators as they move in and out of these areas.
Independence? That doesn't sound like a great idea. It sounds like a prescription for disaster to me. But NASA has been working on this for the past few years. They started on smaller drones that don't carry people. The lessons that they learned from writing those rules are serving as a bit of a foundation for the work they're doing now. Lozito and her team are using data from those simulations to write the algorithms that would allow air traffic control to be digital, more automated, and distributed. In flight, an air taxi would continuously transmit its location to receivers on the ground. We already have this technology with ADS-B, so it's not that big a stretch. As that vehicle is flying, they're monitoring its position in relation to sort of a four-dimensional volume of geography and time. Are they inside the volume? Are they outside that volume? Are they there at the time they're supposed to be? Were they predicted on their flight plan? All those are important factors. But there are many hurdles, of course, when you look at the environment at low altitudes in cities. GPS and cellular signals can be unreliable, and of course, security. Transmitting all this mission-critical life and death information across shared cloud networks carries its own set of risks. And then there's this, and maybe the biggest challenge, this new air traffic control regime needs to work safely alongside or underneath or beside the old one. So how does electrification change the way an aircraft is designed? Let's do a little bit of aerodynamics here. The wings on a small aircraft are not optimized for speed, and that's deliberate. The faster air moves over a wing, the more lift it provides. And the greater the surface area of the wing, the more lift it can create. Kind of basic, right? So for safety's sake, wings are made wide enough to provide adequate lift at slow speeds. Once an airplane levels off, however, it starts flying faster. The added lift from that fat wing is no longer needed. In fact, it's a drag, quite literally. The extra surface area makes the airplane less efficient. So making a wing narrower would reduce the drag, but at slower speeds, not enough lift. Here's where electric motors come in. They offer a solution to this dilemma. They're so lightweight that they can be placed all across a narrow wing. And even at slower speeds, the extra airflow created by the motors themselves adds lift. So in a way, motors can trick the wing into thinking it's flying faster. NASA's first piloted experimental, or X-plane in more than 20 years, is aiming to test this at a fairly large scale. It's called the X-57 Maxwell, 14 electric motors, and the idea is to explore the advantages of distributed electric propulsion. Now, Maxwell is a modification of an existing piston aircraft. The new wing is about 40% of the width of the slow-speed wing that it replaces. It's a huge reduction in drag. It will take off with 14 motors running, and once leveled off, the 12 smaller motors will be shut down to conserve the batteries, the props folded back, and then the two big ones on the end will continue spinning in cruise. Now, this is difficult stuff. In 2016, the Maxwell team ran a test on the lithium-ion batteries, stressed them on purpose to see how safe they might be if they failed in flight. Not so safe. Thermal runaway is what they got. So being NASA and all, they reached out to their friends in Houston who designed some of the pistol grip tools that they use on the International Space Station, astronauts use on spacewalks. And they say the collaboration led to a much safer battery pack for Maxwell. The idea is the transport class dream, right? Carrying hundreds of passengers, tons of cargo. It hinges on range and speed and payload. For now, batteries come up short on all fronts. And while they're getting steadily better, about 5% a year, the gap is wide, and it'll take at least a decade for them to catch up, if ever. So, as we've been discussing earlier with SAF, are there other ways to decarbonize aviation sooner? In Stuttgart, Germany, electrical engineer Josef Kallo is working on a company called H2Fly. And they are making airplanes that run on hydrogen fuel cells. And fuel cells, as you probably know, generate electricity through an electrochemical reaction. Hydrogen reacts with oxygen, which comes in through an air intake, and it generates electricity. And that current powers electric motors. The byproduct? Water. Hydrogen has 3 times more energy density than jet fuel and is the lightest molecule of all. But at atmospheric temperature and pressure, it is a gas, and so it takes up a lot of volume. The practicality of it is difficult. And the energy can't flow out of a fuel cell as fast as it can from a fossil fuel engine or a battery. So there's not really enough power for takeoff with a fuel cell. What they've done here is they use batteries to get it in the air. But it does offer, of course, a lot more range. Kallo and his team have been doing this now for 13 years. This that you're seeing here is his 6th generation aircraft. It has batteries, as we say, for takeoff. And in November of 2020, Kallo says they test flew more than 30 times, validating a range of 500 miles or longer. He believes 80 to 100-seat aircraft with a range of 3,500 kilometers is feasible in the relatively near term. Almost half of emissions from aviation come from flights of less than 2,000 kilometers or 1,200 miles. And that's something for you guys to think about as you make your buys, too, as people ask you questions. Hydrogen could make a big dent at that range price point, if you will. So anyway, aviation, in case you're not paying attention, you guys would be, is in the midst of a revolution. I liken it, I grew up in Detroit. I liken it to Detroit in the, I wasn't growing up in the early 1900s, so, but in Detroit in the early 1900s, inventors were racing to define what the automobile would look like. It was a hothouse of innovation that started and stayed in garages for many years and then seemed to change the world overnight. Those competing in the great electric airplane race are convinced a revolutionary moment like that is in the air. Thank you for your attention, and enjoy your meeting in person.
Thank you so much, Miles, and to all our presenters today. Wow, I mean, I'm not sure about you, but I thought that was so insightful and got so much information. Sustainability is the topic for our times. Whether around the corner or around the world, caring about sustainability doesn't mean giving up on travel altogether, as travel is not the problem. Emissions are the problem. Together we can solve the emissions challenge. Post-pandemic, we have a responsibility to start traveling again, but environmentally responsible, to do so sustainably. Simply turning off business travel is not an option, nor should we rush back en masse post-COVID. The big question is how we travel in the future. So, thank you to all our presenters and panelists for a truly thought-provoking and actionable session today. And thanks to Shell for making the panel possible. Right, so which brings us to the end of our main stage sessions for today, but don't run off yet. We hope all of you watching virtually and on site here in Orlando have had a great day so far. So what's next? We'll see you on the expo floor starting at 2:30 through to 6 p.m. today. And don't forget tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to seeing you at tomorrow's main stage, where it's time to talk about recognition and wellness. So after tonight's events, drinks, dinner, Advil or no Advil tomorrow morning, we'll see you at main stage, please, because it's really important to talk about recognition and wellness, to also recognize our Allied and our Direct Member of the Year and our President's Award as well. So please do join us tomorrow. Thank you.